All right, you're watching Live Now. I'm Austin Westfall, a live look at the White House. The time in the nation's capital approaching 9:30. U.S. Special Envoy Steve Witkoff arriving in Oman this evening ahead of U.S.-Iran talks. The talks are scheduled to take place Friday morning, pretty shortly, and will focus on Iran's nuclear program, its ballistic missile program, as well as its use of proxy terror groups, according to the New York Times. They said that earlier today. Retired Marine Intelligence Officer, host of the Strap podcast, Hal Kempfer, standing by here with me. You know, Hal, you and I have been discussing Iran, and you and I have, kind of been talking about this offline as well. The Times says, in the end, both sides are agreeing to focus on the nuclear issue, but they're going to be also discussing missiles and militant groups. Am I missing something here, Hal? Are they not expected to discuss the recent protests in Iran?
I don't think you're going to hear. Well, we may try. In fact, there was one report today that said, really, if you get down to it, all they've agreed to do is to meet. It's not really clear that there's much in the ways of expectations beyond just meeting. As far as the Iranians concerned, they're going to only talk about nuclear weapons and nuclear weapons development and, things like, enriching uranium and stuff like that. That's what the Iranians think. We're going in there. We want to talk about everything that was just mentioned, but also ballistic missiles, the axis of resistance, all these proxy groups that Iran has everywhere. And we would love to talk about the protests and everything else going in there as well, even though we haven't put that on the table as an official thing that we want to talk about. That is kind of implied that we would bring that up. I don't know what's going to come out of this meeting. I don't know if they're going to get beyond the nuclear discussion. I don't even know if the nuclear discussion is really going to go that far. I'm kind of skeptical that I'm sure they'll come out and say it was constructive. There was good dialogue. Many things were discussed. But every time we turn around in this, it looks like maybe there's a chance for a dialogue with the Iranians. And then they turn around and say, something along the lines of, next time they'll get President Trump when they try to assassinate him or something like that. And you go, well, that's not exactly what I'd call encouraging diplomatic discourse. So we'll see what comes out of this. I'm not saying my expectation's high.
We just got something in from Fox News Radio. They say the State Department is saying, and I'll read this. It's a little bit small. I'll read it verbatim. The State Department, U.S. citizens should expect continued internet outages, plan alternative means of communication, and if safe to do so, consider departing Iran by land to Armenia or Turkey. Actions to take. Leave Iran now. Have a plan for departing Iran that does not rely on U.S. government help. Flight cancellations and disruptions are possible with little warning. Check directly with your airlines for updates. If you cannot leave, find a secure location, avoid demonstrations, keep a low profile. Hal, this was just sent out. My understanding is within the past half hour or so here. What are we to make of the U.S. and more specifically the State Department saying if you're in Iran and you are a U.S. citizen, leave now?
I find this fascinating because this is almost an exact copy of what we did in June. You may recall in June, there have been talks about having talks and setting up a meeting and all this stuff. And then of course, the 12-day war took place and everything else. And so I find this fascinating. I don't know if this is, that's a very good idea. And I don't think it's the first time we've told Americans in Iran to get out of there. But to put this out now in this way kind of underscores the big stick that we have sitting offshore, which is that Naval Armada, the Abraham Lincoln Carrier Task Force in the Arabian Sea, all the ships with Aegis anti-aircraft missile defense system and drone defense system, air defense system that are up and down the Persian Gulf. And so all of these capabilities that we have pushed forward, that we have there now that we didn't have a few weeks ago, and then going into these talks. And frankly, that's one thing I have seen with the Trump administration. They will do unusual things that other administrations would have done, which is, for example, proceeding with talks and then potentially doing something like strikes right before the talks. It's an area of strategic deception that we don't see practiced that much in recent years, but this could be something along those lines. And putting out this warning is kind of, that's, we don't have an embassy we have no diplomatic presence in Iran. So so if any Americans are there, they can't count on America to help the American diplomatic presence to help them because we have no footprint in that country. So if they're there, that's a really bad idea. But it also may be an indicator of what we think is going to come out of these talks, which is the talks will go nowhere. The situation may actually get worse, and the military option may get pushed forward higher on the list of things that we might want to do.
Yeah, so what's the threshold that would trigger the military option, if you will?
Well, the threshold is really the threshold of what Donald Trump thinks is the threshold. I don't know if there's a hard and fast red line that I can point to on this. Obviously, if they started slaughtering their own people again, the protesters aren't protesting right now because it's not safe to go on the streets. But if they were to do something like that, or if they were to start holding a lot of public executions, obviously, if they did anything in the way of launching ballistic missiles or anything we detected where there was a threat that they could get a nuclear weapon, those would all be red lines that we would look at. But those aren't really immediate things that I see. What I really see is President Trump's decision on what he thinks would be the next best move, and some of it will depend on where we are at any particular time. If we can do a debilitating strike at the types of targets and sufficient number of targets with sufficient amount of damage that would send the message that we want to send and minimize the consequences in terms of retaliation. If those things come into place, and there are times, when you do strategic stuff, there are times when you have windows where if you were to do something, this would be an optimal window. Not to say you are going to do it, but if you were, it'd be an optimal window. If one of those windows comes open, that could be a decision criteria for the president.
The time in the nation's capital just past 9:30. The U.S. and Iran have held talks about Iran's nuclear program many times in the past year. It never felt like much came of the past discussions. Hal, is there any reason to believe that this one might actually be different in a positive way?
Well, here, let me be the optimist on this.
Yeah.
All right. The regime is in a horrible situation. They're having a tough time. Oil prices are starting to decline a little bit. They've been fluctuating a lot, mostly because of uncertainty of whether there might be a new war with Iran and whether that could close down the Strait of Hormuz, and not just losing Iranian oil on the global market, but also losing oil, all the oil. 25% of the oil that's shipped around the world actually goes through the Strait of Hormuz. So that would be a big impact on the global oil market. And so there's been a lot of uncertainty on that. And the Iranians have felt that. They felt that in their pocketbooks. They have an economy that just won't move. Obviously Tehran has basic water problems because they're running out of water in that metropolitan area because of mismanagement going back many years, along with some climate change issues. So their backs are up against the wall. So on a positive note, they might be inclined to make concessions now that they wouldn't have been inclined to make, say, 6 months ago or 7 months ago or a year ago. So that's the positive note. The other side is just with the way they keep going back and forth. The problem Iran is facing is if they give up some of these things, they're kind of giving up what identifies the regime, or the way the regime identifies itself in terms of what it's there to do, what its purpose is. And so I think their fear is if they give away too much, if they give away the ballistic missiles, if they forego any nuclear plans, if they get rid of the axis of resistance, the question becomes, what is this, quote, revolutionary regime this in Tehran? What's its purpose? What's it there for? Is it just a government? If it's there for a government, it's not doing a very good job. So why is it there? So they could make themselves or put themselves in a far worse position politically, simply because they lose that sense of what they would think is legitimacy for their regime to exist. So that's the other side, is there's a lot pushing against it as well. So I'm just I'm going to take a wait and see. I'll see what they try to accomplish tomorrow. I don't have any way of really reading the tea leaves one way or the other. But I think it could be they could come out and achieve absolutely nothing. It'll be interesting to hear how we describe it. If we describe it as a waste of time, that nothing, that the Iranians didn't give up anything, that we didn't accomplish anything, then I would be looking very closely at the military options. If we come out and say there's very constructive dialogue, we have a long way to go, but we've actually come to agreement on some key points, that might be indicative that we're going to hold off on doing any military action.
It seems the talks are going to include discussions about missiles and about militant groups. You and I were talking about the idea that Iran, they wanted this to be focused on the nuclear issue. They didn't want to talk about these other issues. But the New York Times does say that missiles will be on the table, at least for the discussions. Other than Israel, Hal, what other Middle East states would want to see Iran's ballistic missile capabilities diminished?
Every other Middle East state would like to see them diminished. Saudi Arabia, all the Gulf states. I can't think of any state over there that wouldn't want to see the Iranian ballistic missile program go away. It's really become the cornerstone of their regime. They have a very large program, even with the 12-day war, even with the Israeli Air Force basically flying with essentially air supremacy throughout Iran, hitting targets at will. It's estimated that only about a third of their launchers were taken out, which means 2/3 are still there, which indicates a very big capability. And their missiles are held in these underground cities where they're very difficult to hit with airstrikes or any type of strikes for that matter. And they bring the missiles up and they put them in the launchers, they launch them, and they have this tremendous capability to rain down destruction all over the Middle East. So every country out there wants to see this. Obviously, Israel wants to see it more than every other country because Israel has been on the receiving end of that ballistic missile threat. And obviously, if something were to happen again, it's anticipated that Israel would again be on the disproportionate receiving end of whatever Iran launches.
Hal Kempfer joining us. Hal is the host of the Strat podcast. You can listen to Strat anywhere podcasts are available. Thanks, Hal.
All right. Thank you, Austin.